It started like every other business flight. Gate A23 was calm. Passengers lined up, some tapping on phones, others sipping airport coffee without a care in the world. But in exactly 5 minutes, the calm would shatter. A man in a sleek navy suit walks toward first class. He isn't just any traveler, he's a tech magnate, a dealmaker heading to New York for the biggest pitch of his career. His seat? 2A. Confirmed, reserved, paid in full. He places his carry-on in the overhead bin, settles in, and nods politely to the flight attendant. The cabin hums with quiet conversation and polite smiles, until another man appears. A different kind of man, with a different kind of expectation. He stares at the black man in 2A for just a little too long. No greeting, no hesitation, just a pointed finger. "That's my seat," he says, loud enough for the nearby rows to turn their heads. The flight attendant walks over. She checks both boarding passes, 2 passengers, 1 seat. But instead of questioning the system or the man who walked in late, she leans toward the seated black executive and utters something that changes the course of the entire flight. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me." There is no scene, no yelling, no resistance, only a quiet refusal, and that apparently was too much. Security is called, voices rise, cameras flash on, passengers start recording. Within minutes, the man in the suit is escorted off the plane, humiliated, judged, and branded as non-compliant. The seat is empty now, but the consequences are just boarding. And 5 minutes later, the entire flight is brought to a stop. Before we continue, if you're watching this, make sure you hit the subscribe button right now so you never miss any powerful true stories like this. Also, head to the comments and let us know, what country are you watching from? We'd love to hear from you. Kendrick Wallace wasn't just flying to New York for business. He was flying to make history. The son of a postal worker and a school librarian, Kendrick had spent most of his life being told he didn't look like he belonged in certain rooms. First, it was gifted programs in elementary school. Later, it was the Ivy League halls where professors mistook him for an athlete instead of a scholar. He learned early how to smile through microaggressions and win respect the hard way, by being better than what they expected. But now, at 39, Kendrick didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He was the founder and CEO of Omnitech Pulse, a data security firm valued at over $800 million. His company had already partnered with Fortune 100s and had just closed a global deal across 3 continents. His flight that morning was meant to seal a transformative merger, one that would grant a major U.S. airline exclusive rights to his firm's biometric ID technology. If signed, the deal would generate billions and give Kendrick a permanent seat at the table of American corporate power. He had chosen to fly commercial that day, not because he had to, but because he believed in humility. He still walked through airports without an entourage, still held doors open for strangers. But he also knew what came with that choice. Every time he flew, he became a silent case study in how America reads race, wealth, and worth. On this particular morning, Kendrick arrived early, passed through TSA without incident, and even helped an older woman lift her bag onto the scanner belt. Nothing about the morning felt unusual. Gate A23 was calm. His name was called for priority boarding. He walked down the jet bridge, nodded politely to the flight attendant, and took his seat 2 aisle side, first class. He tucked his leather laptop case beneath the seat and scrolled through his notes for the upcoming meeting. The numbers were strong. The pitch, bulletproof. His team would be watching from the headquarters in Austin. Everyone was counting on him. But there was one thing he hadn't accounted for: perception. He had the pass, he had the seat, he had the proof. But to someone else, someone who believed entitlement outranked equity, that wouldn't be enough. What Kendrick didn't know was that in just a few minutes, someone would walk down that same aisle, look at him, and decide he didn't belong. And the cabin crew? They wouldn't question that decision, not even once. Boarding had nearly finished. Kendrick adjusted his seatbelt and glanced once more at his screen. Final notes, pitch slides, competitor breakdown. He was locked in. Then came the voice. "You're in my seat." The words weren't tentative. There was no polite tap on the shoulder, no curiosity, only confrontation. A white man, maybe early 50s, in a buttoned blazer and loosened tie, stood over Kendrick's shoulder, lips pressed tight. Kendrick turned, calmly. "This is 2A. I know. That's my seat," the man snapped, now looking directly at the flight attendant who'd been assisting another passenger. She approached, clipboard in hand. "Let's take a look at both your boarding passes," she said, forcing a tight smile. Kendrick offered his phone. 2A. Digital, time-stamped, confirmed. The other man unfolded a paper stub, also read 2A. She frowned slightly but said nothing about the duplicate. Instead, her eyes darted between the two men, one seated, one standing, and it became instantly clear where her trust tilted. "Sir, would you mind stepping out for just a second while we sort this out?" she asked Kendrick. Kendrick blinked. "I'm already seated, my boarding pass checks out. Why am I being asked to move?" A few passengers nearby turned their heads. "This will just take a moment," she added, her voice now edged with pressure. "We don't want to hold up the rest of the cabin." The white man crossed his arms, unmoved. He hadn't been asked to leave his feet. He hadn't even been questioned. Kendrick sat still. "No, I'll wait right here until you sort it out." The air shifted. It wasn't loud, but it thickened. A man across the aisle put down his newspaper. A woman 2 rows back started filming, quietly, her phone tilted behind her purse. The attendant pursed her lips. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time. Please come with me." No, not aggressive, not raised, just clear, direct. The man still standing leaned in slightly and muttered, "You people always gotta make a scene." That's when Kendrick knew. This wasn't about a glitch in the system. This was about assumption. About how quickly a black man in a suit becomes suspicious when his presence challenges someone else's expectation. Kendrick turned back to his phone, saying nothing. The attendant radioed someone. And then, silence. For about 90 seconds, the entire cabin held its breath. 2 airport security personnel appeared at the aircraft door. They weren't briefed on details, they weren't shown boarding passes. They were just told, "There's a situation in 2A." The 2 security officers stepped forward. One of them gave a short nod to the flight attendant, who quickly pointed toward Kendrick. "That's the passenger we need to remove. He's refusing to comply." No questions asked, no clarification. One officer looked down at Kendrick and said firmly, "Sir, we need you to come with us." Kendrick remained seated. "Why?" "I've shown my boarding pass. I followed every instruction. If there's confusion, I'm not the one who created it." The officer paused, suddenly unsure. The second officer turned to the attendant, asking, "What's the issue exactly?" Before she could answer, the white passenger, still standing, still unmoved, spoke again, loud and dismissive. He probably scanned someone else's ticket, or maybe he upgraded himself when no one was looking. The implication wasn't subtle. It never is. That's when the woman seated across the aisle leaned forward. "I saw him board before anyone else. His name was called for priority." Her voice was steady, but she was ignored. Kendrick looked directly at the officers. "Are you removing me because of a system error, or because someone doesn't believe I belong here?" Silence. And then the words that turned the moment from suspicion to insult. "Sir." The attendant said carefully, "You need to understand. We've had problems before with people assuming first class." Assuming first class. The sentence didn't come with volume, it came with weight. It told Kendrick that, in their eyes, his presence in that seat needed extra explanation, that his skin tone overrode his credentials, that he could be a tech founder with a company valued at nearly $1 billion and still be a question mark in the front row of an airplane. He looked at the white man again, still standing there, arms folded like the victor of a battle he never earned. Then Kendrick turned back to the attendant. "Say it plainly," he said. "You don't think I'm supposed to be here." She avoided his eyes. "We're just trying to avoid a disruption." "You created the disruption," he replied. But it didn't matter. The officer reached for Kendrick's arm. Kendrick stood on his own before they could touch him. He gathered his bag, paused, then looked across the cabin. Half the passengers watched with downcast eyes, the other half filmed in silence. The walk down the aisle felt longer than the flight ever would have been. The cameras followed. His seat stayed behind, empty yet claimed. And in that moment, the question wasn't whether Kendrick had paid for the seat. The question was why so many people still believed he hadn't earned it. The aisle stretched in front of him like a narrow stage. Kendrick walked it without protest, but not without pain. He wasn't dragged. He didn't scream. There was no headline-worthy scuffle. But make no mistake, he was stripped of something that day. Not just dignity, not just status, but the basic expectation of fairness. He could feel the eyes on him. Some were sympathetic, some indifferent. A few recorded pretending not to. But no one stood up, not even those who knew exactly what was happening. As Kendrick stepped past row 7, a woman whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "This is wrong." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't look him in the eye. He didn't respond. He couldn't. Every part of him was focused on one thing, holding his composure. The security officers flanked him, not aggressively, but with presence. Enough to make it seem official. Enough to suggest danger where there was none. At the front of the plane, the flight attendant avoided eye contact. The white man was already seated comfortably in 2A, browsing a menu as if nothing had just happened. That was the part that stayed with Kendrick. The ease, the entitlement, the way someone could strip you of your place and slide into it without hesitation. He exited into the jet bridge, the door shutting behind him with a hollow seal. Outside, the gate area was mostly empty. A supervisor waited near the desk, tapping on a tablet. No apology, no explanation, just, "We're sorting things out. Please wait here." Kendrick stood in silence. His phone buzzed, texts from his executive team. The merger partner was already en route to the Manhattan boardroom. The pitch window was tight. There wouldn't be a second chance. Still, he couldn't bring himself to reply. Not yet. Inside that plane, the seat with his name was now occupied by someone who had offered no proof. Just assumption. He wondered how many times this had happened before, unrecorded. How many black men and women had been removed from places they'd rightfully earned, just because someone else didn't see them there. And then, as if the moment wasn't sharp enough, he heard laughter from inside the gate. Two ground staffers exchanging comments. One of them, unaware he was within earshot, said, "I don't know why these people act like they're owed something." The other chuckled, "Let's just get this plane out before it turns into a protest." Kendrick looked at them. They didn't flinch. They didn't care who he was, because in their eyes it didn't matter. That seat wasn't taken from a CEO, it was taken from someone they never saw to begin with. The waiting area felt colder than before, not in temperature, but in tone. Detached, distant. Kendrick sat near the far end of the gate, away from the murmurs, the awkward glances, the tension pretending not to exist. No one approached him. No one said a word. The same employees who'd ushered him out now avoided even looking his way. It was the kind of silence that followed after people believed the problem had been removed. He checked his watch. The plane hadn't left yet. He could still see it through the glass, motionless on the tarmac. Its engines off, the sky behind it turning bright with the late morning sun. Passengers were probably settling into snacks and magazines, unaware or pretending not to care about what had just taken place. He should have been on it, closing a deal that took years of preparation, decades of grit. Instead, he was sitting alone, watching it all unravel without raising his voice once. Kendrick reached for his phone. His inbox was piling up. Texts, missed calls, a growing number of meeting reminders. His assistant was asking for an update. The investors were waiting. The presentation was ready to go. But the man behind that presentation had just been escorted off a plane like a threat. What do you say to your board when you're humiliated on your way to represent them? He leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling. The same white panels he'd seen in dozens of airports around the world. But now they felt different, like a cover, not a ceiling. A place where voices were muted, where injustice echoed only if someone had the power or privilege to amplify it. He thought back to his mother, a school librarian who raised him to speak carefully but confidently. She used to say, "The world will test your patience before it tests your brilliance." Today felt like both. A janitor pushing a cart passed by. She looked at him for a moment. Her eyes lingered, softer than the others. But she said nothing, just nodded once and kept moving. That tiny acknowledgement was the only human moment he'd felt since being removed. The silence around him wasn't just physical. It was institutional, normalized, protected. This wasn't the first time Kendrick had been underestimated. It wasn't the first time his success failed to shield him, but it was the first time it had happened this publicly, with cameras on and no excuses to hide behind. And he knew that silence wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something louder. He pulled up one of the recordings already posted online. 17 seconds. Clear audio. His face, the confrontation, the walkout. Already over 80,000 views. Kendrick watched it again. Not out of vanity, but out of responsibility. Because if the world was going to see him removed, they were also going to hear why. By the time Kendrick left the airport, the video had already made its way to 4 different platforms. A woman seated 3 rows back had posted the clip on TikTok with the caption, "Black CEO kicked off his own first-class seat. You tell me why." In just under an hour, the video had over 250,000 views. Within 3, it crossed 1 million, and that was only one angle. Passengers from across the cabin had uploaded versions, each one showing the same thing from a different lens. Kendrick seated, quiet, respectful, then removed without resistance. But the footage wasn't what hit hardest. It was the commentary. People flooded the comments. This could have been my dad. I've seen this happen, just not to someone powerful enough to be heard. Watch how no one questions the white guy. Typical. Why is it always us being asked to prove ourselves? Twitter picked it up next. A journalist for a major outlet posted a screen grab of the incident, overlaid with Kendrick's company profile. This is Kendrick Wallace. He owns the software most Fortune 500s rely on. Yesterday, he was told to leave a seat he paid for because someone didn't believe him. And then the fire spread. Influencers reposted, activists responded. News sites began drafting stories before Kendrick even had a chance to give his side. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a theory. But only one truth sat at the center. A black man was told he didn't belong. Not because of evidence, but because of assumption. The airline's first response was brief, an uninspired 4-line email to reporters. We are aware of an incident involving a passenger and are reviewing the matter internally. We regret any inconvenience caused and remain committed to providing a safe, respectful environment for all travelers. It was cold, clinical, impersonal, and people noticed. The backlash was immediate. #not his seat began trending. Major public figures, CEOs, athletes, entertainers posted photos of their own first-class experiences and asked a simple question. Would they have pulled me off too? Kendrick said nothing. Not yet. He wasn't ready to speak, not until he knew what he wanted to say. But the world had already chosen its stance. His name was now part of a broader conversation, one bigger than just a flight or a boarding pass. It had become about proof. The kind of proof black people are asked to show at every level, no matter how high they rise. And for Kendrick Wallace, the seat may have been taken, but the narrative wasn't going to be. Not anymore. What the airline didn't realize, what the flight crew couldn't have known, is that Kendrick Wallace wasn't just another first-class passenger with a powerful job. He was their partner. For the past 8 months, Kendrick's company, Omnitech Pulse, had been in confidential talks with their executive board. The deal? A multi-billion-dollar biometric integration that would streamline everything from check-in to in-flight identity verification. It would have made the airline the first in the nation to offer full-scale facial recognition tech through a black-owned firm. If successful, the partnership would have set a new industry standard and unlocked unprecedented market reach in Africa, South America, and the Middle East. It was the airline's chance to modernize while making a bold, inclusive business statement. But they didn't see him that day. Not as a visionary, not as a partner, not even as a human being who deserved basic decency. They saw a problem, a delay, a disruption to be quietly removed. Kendrick had arrived in New York 5 hours late. His team had scrambled to rearrange the meeting, but by then, the other party was spooked. The delay had raised concerns. The moment had passed, and Kendrick knew something else had shifted too. This wasn't just an operational failure. It was a personal one, a betrayal disguised as protocol. He didn't call the boardroom, he called his legal team. That night, Kendrick drafted a formal withdrawal letter, ending all pending negotiations with the airline and its corporate partners. No warning, no softening. Just one sentence that cut to the heart of the matter. We cannot build a future of trust with organizations that question our legitimacy before we even speak. By morning, the airline's executive team was in damage control mode. Calls flooded in from investors. Media requests piled up. Shareholders demanded answers, but it was too late. Kendrick had already gone public with the withdrawal. He hadn't mentioned the altercation. He didn't need to. The timeline spoke for itself. A black CEO was pulled from a seat he'd paid for, on a plane owned by a company he was about to help revolutionize. And within 24 hours, that future was gone. Not because Kendrick lost his temper, but because someone else couldn't control their assumptions. By sunrise, the story had spread beyond social media and activist circles. It was front-page news. Black tech CEO pulled from first class, partnership canceled hours later. Airline loses major deal after discrimination incident. $5 billion mistake, one flight, one seat, and one CEO who walked away. Business networks ran emergency segments. Market analysts speculated on the full scope of damage. Investors watched in disbelief as the airline's stock dipped 5% before the trading day even opened. Inside the company's Manhattan headquarters, the mood was frantic. Legal scrambled to draft a statement. The PR team pushed out phrases like unfortunate misunderstanding and deep regret. But the problem wasn't just optics, it was operational. Real numbers, real loss. Because Kendrick wasn't just any CEO, he had brought with him a full-stack solution to modernize aviation infrastructure, years ahead of anything the competition was offering. And his team? They were ready to scale it across continents. The airline had gambled everything on that deal. But on one short flight, one uniformed crew made a decision that told Kendrick exactly how they viewed him. And now that decision had cost them the future. In boardrooms across the industry, executives watched with quiet horror. Because if this could happen to Kendrick Wallace, someone with stature, with global leverage, what about everyone else? What about the passengers who didn't have viral footage or a media presence? Kendrick had never planned to make the incident public, but once it was, he made sure the focus didn't blur. This wasn't about his ego, it was about equity. It was about the idea that, even at the top, Black excellence was treated as conditional, always one assumption away from being questioned, challenged, or erased. A rival airline issued a subtle jab on social media. When we say every passenger matters, we mean it. Every seat, every story, every time. It was a clear shot, and it worked. Their stock rose the same day. Meanwhile, Kendrick's company issued a concise press release. Omnitech Pulse will no longer pursue collaborations with organizations unable to distinguish professionalism from prejudice. No apology from the airline could cover the damage. No refund, no executive statement, no corporate donation could undo what had been revealed. Because this wasn't a PR issue, it was a value issue. And the price tag wasn't just reputational, it was measurable. $5 billion, gone. Because someone couldn't see a black man in a suit as the person in charge. Kendrick stayed quiet through the storm. While media requests poured in and headlines circled the globe, he declined interviews. No statements. No press conferences. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he wanted to say it right. Then, 4 days later, he published a personal piece. No branding, no legal jargon, just a direct, public letter shared on his company's site and across his verified social media. I wasn't removed from that seat because I posed a threat. I was removed because someone saw me, didn't recognize me, and decided I didn't belong. The post went viral within the hour. It wasn't angry, it was precise, focused, firm. Kendrick didn't just speak for himself. He spoke for the thousands who'd messaged him privately since the video went live. Black travelers, executives, students, even flight attendants. People who'd been questioned, doubted, degraded without evidence, simply for not fitting into someone else's idea of belonging. He quoted his mother, "The more polite you are, the more dangerous they think you must be." He ended the piece with something heavier. This isn't just about racism in the sky. It's about racism in the system that tells you to sit down and be silent, even after you've earned the right to speak. Kendrick didn't stop there. The next week, he announced the launch of ClearCode, an independent racial equity watchdog focused on the travel and hospitality industries. It would gather traveler testimonies, analyze discrimination patterns, and publish annual transparency reports on major airlines, hotels, and booking agencies. He committed $10 million of his own capital to fund it. Within 48 hours, 2 tech leaders and 1 former airline executive joined the board. The airline that removed Kendrick remained silent. But the industry was now watching something bigger unfold. Kendrick's name had shifted from trending topic to organizational leader. He wasn't just correcting a wrong, he was building a tool to expose all the ones that never made the news. This wasn't damage control, this was direction. He took the same system that tried to erase him and used it to mark a new path forward. Not because he wanted revenge, but because he knew others couldn't afford to wait for justice in silence. The release of Kendrick's letter marked a turning point, but what followed was something no one fully anticipated. His inbox, already full, overflowed. Thousands of messages poured in, not just from supporters, but from people with their own stories. Flight attendants who had been reprimanded for standing up to bias. Black passengers who were downgraded, detained, or dismissed. Business travelers who'd watched opportunity vanish in moments of quiet racism no one dared to challenge. But this time someone had, and that act became a spark. ClearCode, his new equity platform, was barely a week old, when national news outlets began running full-length segments. Kendrick was invited to speak on late-night shows, panels, and even by members of Congress. He didn't accept most, but he chose his stage carefully. A week after the incident, Kendrick stood in front of the Senate Commerce Committee at a special hearing on racial bias in air travel. He didn't deliver outrage, he delivered data. He showed patterns, disproportionate removals, subjective policy enforcement, and unreported racial incidents that were quietly handled behind corporate walls. He gave voice to passengers whose names would never trend. And then he said something that silenced the room. If your dignity disappears at 30,000 feet, it was never protected on the ground. The moment aired live, and within hours it went global. Allies began stepping up. Civil rights organizations pledged support. A major credit card company pulled sponsorship from the airline. A union of pilots demanded bias training reform. Even within the airline itself, anonymous staff began leaking internal messages showing management's rush to suppress the story. But Kendrick never focused on revenge. He focused on resolve. He launched a reporting app through ClearCode, allowing travelers to log incidents in real time. He opened regional listening sessions in 5 major airports. He announced grants for Black students pursuing aviation careers, saying, "We won't just challenge the system, we'll build within it." The media tried to frame him as a crusader, but Kendrick corrected them. He was an entrepreneur, a father, a man who had been judged not for his power, but for the color of the skin behind it. He hadn't asked to lead a movement, but now that it had begun, he wasn't stepping back. And as his story became more than a moment, more than a video or a headline, it reshaped how people saw their role in that cabin. Suddenly, silence didn't feel safe anymore. Suddenly, the aisle felt a little shorter, and justice a little closer. Months passed, the headlines faded, the comment threads cooled, and the world, at least on the surface, moved on. But Kendrick hadn't. He hadn't forgotten the look in the flight attendant's eyes. He hadn't forgotten the silence from fellow passengers, and he hadn't forgotten the empty seat, the one with his name on it, that still didn't feel like it was ever meant for him. Now he stood at another airport, ticket in hand. Same airline, different city, different flight, same first-class section. He could have flown private. He had, many times since. But this flight wasn't about convenience. It was about presence, about being seen again and not shrinking to make others comfortable. The boarding gate was quiet. A few glances followed him, recognition maybe, or just curiosity. But no one said anything. Not until the agent scanned his ticket and looked up with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Wallace." No pause, no second guessing, no sideways glance. He nodded, said thank you, and walked down the jet bridge. Inside the cabin, he placed his bag overhead and sat in 2A. The same seat, same side of the aisle, same polished armrest. But this time it didn't feel like a test. It felt like reclamation. A new flight attendant came by with a drink list. She greeted him by name. Again, with no hesitation. Small thing, big shift. As the other passengers boarded, Kendrick stared out the window. His mind wasn't on the merger that never happened, or the money lost. It wasn't even on the viral video that started it all. It was on the future. Because somewhere out there, another Black traveler was walking toward a gate right now, wondering if they'd be questioned, challenged, doubted. Wondering if today would be the day they were reminded that confidence wasn't enough to protect you from bias. But maybe, just maybe, the day would go differently. Maybe someone would remember what happened on that flight from Dallas. Maybe they'd remember that when Kendrick was asked to leave, he didn't disappear. He responded, with clarity, with structure, and with a voice too firm to ignore. Now he was back in the same seat. But this time it didn't belong to him because he fought for it. It belonged to him because it always had. The difference? Now the world knew it too. Some stories end with applause, others with silence. This one ends with clarity. Because after all the noise, the trending hashtags, the corporate panic, the public reckonings, what mattered most was what lingered after the crowd moved on. And for Kendrick Wallace, what lingered was purpose. He never asked to be a symbol. He didn't plan to be the face of anything. But when the world tried to reduce him to a misunderstanding, he did what Black professionals are often forced to do. He turned humiliation into leadership, disrespect into movement, dismissal into memory. He didn't just respond to injustice. He reshaped what justice could look like. Not through rage, not through revenge, but through structure, accountability, and visibility. ClearCode is now active in 8 airports. The reporting app has logged over 9,000 traveler incidents, cases that were once brushed aside, now cataloged, verified, and counted. Airlines have begun adopting new transparency protocols, and conversations that were once taboo in boardrooms now lead agendas. Because of one man, one seat, one moment that told him he didn't belong. And a decision, his decision, to stay rooted in who he was, even when the world tried to push him out. But this story isn't about one man. It's about all the silent removals that never made the news. It's about every time someone was asked to prove they were worthy of what they already earned. And it's about what happens when someone finally says, no more. So the next time someone is told to step aside, maybe someone else will stand up. Maybe someone will speak. Maybe someone will remember Kendrick. Because what happened on that flight didn't just echo through boardrooms and news cycles. It echoed through a generation, raised to believe silence was the safer option. It wasn't. And Kendrick Wallace proved it. He didn't clear his name. He never had to. He cleared a path for others to take their seat and never question whether they deserved to be there. Thank you for watching this story on Echoes of Hope Stories HQ. If this moved you, share it, comment below with your thoughts, and tell us, have you ever witnessed something like this? Or lived it? Subscribe for more powerful real stories that expose injustice and uplift truth. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Don't let it go unheard. Echoes of Hope.